Hi, this is Dr. Steve from Misericordia University, and welcome to Art Week number 2 from the course Integrating the Arts. This week, we're going to focus on developmental stages and developmentally appropriate practice in art. In this video, let's consider the developmental stages of art in early childhood education. Let's look at the developmentally appropriate practice in art. And then let's gain a brief introduction and overview of the periods of art. And then, in our face-to-face class this week, let's apply the information we learned here with some hands-on activities. So let's begin by considering the developmental stages of art development, and then let's consider some developmentally appropriate practice. Some researchers suggest that our early childhood students develop in terms of art in 3 different stages. The first stage is the scribble stage. And this stage we see in children who are under the age of 4. When they draw before the age of 4, the children do not really do any planning in advance. There's no thinking about what they're going to do or how they're going to attempt it or try to fit it on the page even. They just start drawing. In fact, in many cases, they use their entire arm in drawing. Because they're using their entire arm, they tend to draw off the page. Now, as they progress a little further, we find that after children draw like this, they may even name the scribble. So, in other words, what they're really doing here is they are drawing first, and then they're stopping to see what it looks like to them, and then they add some other further detail afterwards to enhance that, which is interesting because as children get older, and us today as adults, we would do the opposite. We would conceive of an idea, we would see how we're going to put it on that paper, we would plan it out a little bit, and then we would set out to draw it. But children in the scribble stage do exactly the opposite. They're drawing first and then looking at it later. In the second stage of art development, students age somewhere between 4 and 7, they enter the pre-schematic stage. In the pre-schematic stage, children are drawing what they see and what's important to them. So the drawings are not realistic, but rather the items that are more important or things that are more impressive to them tend to be drawn larger. So typically when children in this stage are drawing people, they draw what we call tadpole people. In other words, you're going to see a head, and then you're going to see something that represents arms or legs, because they know that arms and legs are found on the person, but they're not the primary piece. It's really the face of the person. And what's interesting here is that researchers have found that it's a normal stage of development because this has been found in drawings around the world. So it's not just particular to one particular society. So notice in the drawings here on this page, notice the tadpole look, notice the large head, notice the emphasis on the face, and even in some cases hair, if they've noticed this. And otherwise, there's arms and legs, but they're not really important to them at this point, so they're just saying, well, they exist there. So that's the pre-schematic stage. After pre-schematic, students approximately age somewhere between 7 and 9 enter the schematic stage. Notice that pre-schematic and schematic students are setting out to draw something in particular as opposed to the scribble stage before age 4 where they're just setting out to just draw for the sake of drawing, and then they're going to look at it and see what it is to them afterwards. In the schematic stage, we find that children already have a schema for the way things look. In other words, they're starting to understand the scheme of things. So they're trying to make an object, and they're trying to draw it as they see it. They're starting to use baselines. You start to see skylines. And you also start to see the beginning of the awareness of perspective. Now, they're drawing what they know rather than what they're actually seeing in many cases. So they're again, it's not going to be like a photograph. It's not going to be a realistic picture, but rather they're drawing what they're aware of, just similar to the tadpole people. But here, it's more sophisticated than tadpole people, but these are known as X-ray people. In other words, they're drawing, in many cases, a body under the clothes because they know that arms and legs exist underneath pants and shirts and things of that nature. So they may even draw a profile, a side view of a person's face, but they'll put two eyes on it. Because again, they're drawing from their knowledge rather than trying to, they're trying to be realistic, but rather than drawing an actual realistic picture of what they actually see in front of them. It is important to include art experiences in the early childhood curriculum because art definitely contributes to child development. So how does it do this? One way is through artistic development. By having exposure to and experience with art in the classroom, children increase their observational skills. They also learn art techniques. In last week's class, we talked about form. We talked about the elements of art. So they learn different techniques, which they can then begin to incorporate into their own artwork. They start to understand the relationship of art to culture and history. And as we consider the art periods later in this video, you'll realize that it is very difficult, in fact impossible, to separate out art or music from the culture in which it was created and from the history in which it's situated. So children start to understand the relationships of art to culture and history. They also then start to appreciate it. They start to enjoy images. They start to enjoy looking at art and, of course, also creating art. So the bottom line is that art contributes to children's development by helping them understand and analyze and to critique images. Now, that's a very important skill in today's world because we live in a highly visual society. And whether it's through advertising, through different media, through online, we see so many images popping up. Well, we have to be able to analyze them, understand them, critique them, and then work with them. A second really major contribution of art experiences to child development, something that they will experience and be influenced by well into adulthood, is their creative development. Creativity is such an important item, and we find that the world of work is always asking for more creativity from its workers. In schooling and higher education, we want to see more creativity. Well, how do you kind of provoke that? How do you encourage that? How do you foster that creativity? Art is a really good way to do this. So we can enhance with art a child's creativity, which means that down the road they can start looking for innovative ways. They can look for adaptations. So creative people see multiple solutions to a problem. They develop original thoughts. They come up with imaginative ways of approaching things, and then their ideas come into the world through different inventions or different techniques or different ways of doing things. So think of some of the really amazing things we see in the world today, whether it's a vaccine to some virus or disease like cancer. Who is going to be able to figure that out? Think of airplanes that can seat over 500 people. Think of being able to travel to the moon, or now Our society is looking to travel to other planets and beyond. Like, who thought of that? Well, certainly someone, or in this case, in each of these developments, many someones who were very creative. So creativity is a very important contribution of art to a child's development. Since creativity is such an important facet of being a productive adult in society, let's take a better look at creativity. One study looked at creativity in terms of divergent thinking, and it looked at approximately 1,600 students who were tested throughout their school career. They used the same students, the same instrument to measure the differences. They started with preschoolers, and they determined in terms of ways of thinking, those who think in different ways, divergent thinkers, about 98% of them tested at the genius level. They thought in really creative, wonderfully different, divergent ways. By age 8 to 10, that same group, about 32% tested at that level. By age 14 or 15, only 10% of that original group still thought in divergent ways. One question that may occur to you is, what happens if the typical early childhood learner comes in as a divergent thinker already, or that's fostered very early on? What happens in schooling over time if it seems like we're kind of killing that off or suppressing that divergent thinking? It's important to encourage this divergent thinking because other characteristics of creative thinking and ability build upon this skill if they can think in different and unique ways. Another researcher, Robinson, also looked at creativity, and he determined that there are 4 characteristics of any creative activity that we can do with our students. First, we want to encourage them to think imaginatively. Think open, wide open thoughts. How can you approach a particular task or problem? And that's the second characteristic, something that's on purpose. So give the student something to do, an objective, a purpose. So they will purposefully work to address that particular situation. And then you want them to generate original thoughts or ideas or some product to be able to address that problem in a creative way. And then we're going to focus on and hold valuable the thoughts or ideas or products that they develop. Further, we want children to explore topics, and we want them to try different media more in depth. We'd like them to be able to revisit their work and maybe add more to it and refine it a little more. And further, we could ask them to take the same problem, the same issue, the same topic or theme, and examine it in different media. In other words, try different approaches to the same task or the same issue or the same problem. By doing this, you will be fostering creativity and more creative thinkers who will ideally take this information and use it in other problems and other situations in life. Art experiences also contribute to a child's emotional development. We find that as children work with art, they gain self-confidence and they feel pride in what they're doing. And that's one reason we want to expose them to different techniques and different media and different ways of creating art so that they can be more successful in their expression of art. Then they feel pride. They experience success. A great thing about artwork is that it's an outlet for our students to express strong emotions that maybe they can't talk about successfully, or they have difficulty describing or verbalizing what they're feeling. Maybe they can't say it accurately, but maybe they can draw it with more accuracy. You can see the intensity in there, and you can see what the depth of their feeling. Art experiences also contribute to a child's social development. We already mentioned that it's difficult to view an artwork outside of and apart from its culture and the time period in which it was created. So when you're exposing children to different artwork of different historical periods, and then ask them to maybe design something in accordance with that, or just enrich them so that's just another item that they can use in creating other set of techniques when they're creating their own artwork, they start to understand that people from different cultures and different time periods have certain unique values, and they saw things in certain ways. So they start to appreciate that and become more open to that way of thinking. Also, depending on the activities that you conduct with your children, you may give them the opportunity to collaborate together on an art project. And doing this allows them to learn about diverse views, about how to negotiate, how to collaborate, how to work together, and how to make art in a group setting. Including art experiences in the early childhood curriculum also contributes significantly to cognitive development. I think a very important point here is that art is considered to be a child's first written language because it's a format that allows children to convey ideas to others, and that opens up dialogue. And then children can also ask questions that assist in a deeper understanding of those topics. So it's considered a first written language, and that's a very significant point. Along with that, art making is a form of inquiry. We've already mentioned that at our first class meeting, in our first video. It's inquiry because it allows a child to learn about the world, about whatever topic, whatever the subject of the artwork is, and also to learn about self in the process. And also, the examining and the discussing of the artwork develops visual perception and visual thinking. So this is a cognitive process of giving meaning to images. And as we know as adults, a lot of times we're looking at different different types of visuals, different graphics, charts, and so on. And we have to get meaning and derive meaning out of these pieces. This is a first step in helping children do that. Art experiences also contribute to cognitive development by allowing children to see things from different vantage points, to explore them from different points of view. They can explore spatial concepts. In the process, they can pose problems, they can organize their thinking, they can reflect on what they've learned, they can even solve problems in the process. So it's like thought experiments. They can learn to think more clearly and more deeply. In the process, they can also experiment with cause and effect. And also by working with different art materials, they can learn about the properties of different materials. Finally, experience with art in the classroom contributes to physical development of our early childhood students. Art is very physical because you're doing things with your hands. It's very physical, so it tends to develop the large and small muscles, and it improves eye-hand coordination. Now, when we look at creative art, now this, remember we were talking about prescribed art or the product-oriented art, creating of crafts, where a student is trying to just reproduce what the teacher has shown him or her. The opposite of that is creative art, the process art. So we find that creative art provides a very motivating environment, and children in that environment get to practice and experiment with, and then they get to perfect their motor control. Research shows that children are much more passionate when they're creating their own art as opposed to just reproducing a particular craft. And then they typically repeat and they practice and then they master the skills involved in creating art. So art significantly contributes to early childhood development. Let's turn our focus to developmentally appropriate practice in art in our classrooms. A very important thing to realize is that children need the opportunity to experiment. They need to explore different art media. They have to look at tools and elements and techniques. They need to experiment with these things. So first important practice is for teachers to help students become competent in the use of different art media. Because the more competent that they are, just like in language, the more vocabulary that you have, the more about syntax that you understand, you can better express your ideas and your thoughts. You'll be more successful and it'll be more satisfying and self-esteem boosting in the process because you can express your ideas and thoughts better. So having said that, one of the major art goals for children under 3 years old is exploration of both media and art tools. Give them opportunity to try different things. Let them explore with paper, with cardboard. Give them clay. Give them crayons. Let them see how a marker is different. Let them look at different types of paint. And also, let them start to explore and see what color is all about. And of course, it's very important to realize when you're working with children under age 3 that all the art materials that you purchase and that you use in the classroom are safe to ingest, and make sure that they're not going to pose any kind of choking hazard. So when are children ready to engage in different types of art experiences? Well, it might surprise you, they're normally ready a lot earlier than what the teacher might think. As soon as children show interest, they're ready for drawing. At age 1, most children have the ability to draw, they can paint, they can model, they can make collages. That's at age 1. At age 2, most children are ready to start looking at more advanced things like printmaking, which is really satisfying for them because they're exploring the different parts of their body, and they can create artwork with them, especially their hands and also their feet. So it might surprise you how early we can engage students in different types of art media. As you introduce different art techniques and different art media, of course, we're going to add them little by little. We're not going to barrage the students up front with everything. So, for example, if you're introducing 3-year-olds to painting, don't start by giving them a whole set of colors with which they can paint. Maybe introduce them to paint by giving them just one color. And then you can add some white paint so that children can explore changing the tint of that color. You can make it lighter. And then add additional colors as they're progressing. And then try different types of paper. Let them try different types of brushes as they progress. So don't bombard them up front, but add little by little. For the rest of this video, let's turn our attention to getting an introduction and an overview of some of the major periods of art. Typically, art history is divided into 2 main categories. And we're talking art from the beginning of human civilization to our modern day. It's either categorized as pre-modern or modern. And typically, the time of Impressionism, of that period of artwork, that's normally considered the start of the modern art. We have been describing throughout this video how styles of art have developed. They developed in a particular culture, and they developed in a particular time period with different things happening. So realize that different styles of art have developed through social movements, and they reflect those social movements, different beliefs of that particular time. But also realize that there was only certain available artistic technology in each of these periods. So sometimes the artists were limited in their means of expression. So that has to factor in here too. The first major art period that we're going to consider for our overview is called the medieval period. And that lasted for approximately 1,000 years. Now realize that this part of the presentation is not meant to be exhaustive by any means. It's just an overview. So in addition to the periods that we look at, there are also sub-periods and offshoot periods, and there are also many other ways to consider periods of artwork. But let's start with the medieval. In general, and realize I might at times be a little oversimplifying, but in general, artwork of this time was characterized by more stern, serious, religious paintings. So look at the painting depicted here. You could see the seriousness, you can see the religious nature, and also notice that no one's smiling in there. It is considered very serious and, like as I said, more stern. And this typically reflected the times and also the locations of where these paintings would be found, many times in churches and cathedrals. During the Renaissance, we see also religious-based art to a large extent. But notice how the artwork has changed, because keep in mind that the techniques and also the artistic technologies that were available have grown and have improved. So you'll notice that during the Renaissance, we see religious values and beliefs coming through these paintings and also these sculptures. Look at the difference from this painting by Rembrandt. When we look at the Baroque and the high Baroque, known as Rococo, many times we see darkness, and then we see lighting that's used in a very dramatic way. So look at this painting depicted here. Look how dark it looks, but look at the main characters, and look at that dramatic use of light. In the neoclassical period, we find artists wanted to kind of get away from some of the new ways of painting and doing artwork that they were experiencing, and they wanted to do a return to the classical ways of the Greco-Roman world. So you'll find both the subject matter and also the style is like going back in time. So we find still poses, we find very sharp lines typically during the neoclassical period. During the Romantic period, we find emotional art. So we're talking about romantic, we're not talking about romantic love, but rather emotions. During this period in history, people were more focusing on imagination and the rise of individualism. So we see that shining through this artwork. Just consider the other artwork from other periods prior to this that we've just looked at. Look how different this is. Look how elaborate. Does it evoke some type of emotions from you as you look at this? This is Romanticism. In the art period known as Realism in the mid-1800s, we find that in society, people were starting to focus more on the common, on the ordinary, and they were looking at things more realistically. And then likewise, in their artwork produced during this time, artists wanted to show ordinary subjects painted doing regular, normal, everyday, ordinary things, and in a very realistic way, hence the word realism. So if you look at this, it does kind of look like a photo of an action shot of people doing certain things in the fields here, gleaning items from the field. In the late 1800s, we find a very interesting technology development, and that was photography. So coming off of the realism period of art, we find that photography was showing you absolute realism, again, according to the best technology of its time. The photographers were doing the best that they could. And as artists many times do, they wanted to rebel and use their sense of individualism and try to do something different from realism. And hence we had Impressionism. Impressionists really rebelled against these ways, and they, instead of painting a realistic picture of something, an accurate, what you would see picture, they wanted to give you an impression of something. So look at these two works depicted here, one by Claude Monet and the other by Edgar Degas. Notice how you're getting feelings and impressions of these subjects. So there's a lot of emotion in here, as opposed to a realistic photograph of subjects like this performing the same types of actions. Much more emotional here. Realize, as we consider these different accepted periods of art, when they were actually happening, no one knew that they were in those particular periods. The period idea, all of that hierarchy and that nomenclature and so on, was added after the fact as we were reacting to what artists in general were doing during these different time periods. When we look at Impressionism, at the height of Impressionism, people were trying to express emotion. Well, then some artists took it even further. For example, here is a famous painting, you probably recognize this, called The Scream by Edvard Munch. And here, this is characterized by expressing more emotion and an even more meaning rather than realism. As you can see, this is not like a realistic photograph, but what we see here is the feelings and the thoughts and maybe the viewpoint of the subject in the painting and what he is experiencing. In the early 1900s, in the art period known as Cubism, the artworks during this period were characterized by taking a subject and then breaking it into different parts and then reassembling them in different ways. So one way to think about this would be if you took a photograph of something, and in today's world we have apps that will do this, they will create a puzzle by breaking that picture, that graphic, into different pieces. Now normally the ideal here is to replace all of those, to reassemble the puzzle and put it back to how it originally realistically looked. But in Cubism, they would do the same thing, but not reassemble it. Instead, assemble it in new ways, and in fact, sometimes displaying even different views of the same subject at the same time, as depicted here by this Picasso work. Going a little further in this direction, we find abstract artists, and we still find abstract art happening to this very day, that it's characterized by using like a language, if you will, of shape, form, color, and lines to create images that are not realistic in many cases at all, but very much trying to give a feeling of, or an impression, or an idea of something. And instead of sometimes giving a full impression, really kind of veering farther from that and exploring it in a very abstract way, a different way of thinking. Just consider the two paintings depicted below. Something by Henri Matisse, The Yellow Curtain. So you can kind of get the feel of a yellow curtain there, but you definitely can't directly see it. So it is definitely abstract. And the second painting that's depicted here about windows being opened at the same time, when you see that description and that title, now you can start to see some of that in this painting. But again, it's very abstract. During World War I, as our world, many countries in the world were involved in the horrors of major warfare, artists started to react to that. And they were reacting to the horrors of war and the crazy thoughts in their view. They're of these rational thoughts that really were kind of crazy, that led countries into war and to hurt and kill each other. And from this, we find the period of art called Dada has emerged. And what you find in Dada is it's just really ridiculous, silly work. Consider the two paintings depicted here. The Murdering Airplane of Max Ernst. So you can see all kinds of figures there. You can see people, looks like animals. And you see an airplane that's a murdering airplane. And by Duchamp, you can see a painting that looks like the Mona Lisa, that looks like it's defaced with a mustache. Again, ridiculous, silly art. But it wasn't meant to be silly. It was meant to be a revolt against what was going on in the world at that time. We are going to conclude our view of various art periods by considering one last one, Surrealism. In Surrealism, well, we find that in the early 1900s through like maybe 1950-ish, we have psychologists working. We have people like Sigmund Freud doing psychoanalysis and looking at dreams. So in the art period from the 1920s, and a little bit beyond, we see the painting of dreams as depicted here by an artwork you'll probably recognize. It's by Salvador Dali. Notice that this is a dreamlike state. It's clearly painted, but it's like illogical objects, things that you might see in a dream, but not in the real world. Remember that this was a brief overview of some of the major periods of art throughout history, but there are so many others that you can explore. Through this brief presentation, I hope you're able to realize the richness of different types of artworks that are available to share with your students. Share with them different styles, different purposes for creating artwork, and show how a different expression came out of the artists as a result of different happenings in their culture and in the time frame in which they lived and worked. There are many good sites online in which you can view the artwork of different artists, and you can also view information about the different art periods, the artists who worked during those periods and were active during those times, and also learn more about what was going on in the world and in their culture at those times. We've already looked at art.com. If you click on all art, you can see a lot of different periods appear, and you can see a lot of representative artworks from those periods. Let's take a look at these two other sites that are listed here. A lot of people like looking at the For Dummies series of books, and they tend to be a lot of fun to read, easy to understand, and also provide a good, solid framework for understanding whatever the topic is. And this book is no less than that. It's a very good book, Art History for Dummies. So here's the website that goes along with Art History for Dummies and deals with art history timeline. Take a look at how all these different timelines are listed and movements, and also characteristics of the time, some of the chief artists, and some of the famous works that a lot of people would recognize that are representative of that particular period or movement, and also a brief description of some of the historical events that were going on during the time of these artists. Notice they've broken this down into more periods and went deeper in here and much more thorough than we did in our presentation. Traveling through the Romans, the Byzantine, here's the Middle Ages, medieval period, Renaissance, and so on. And you can see a whole lot of valuable information here as you travel through, going right to the postmodern era. And also this site, visualartscork.com. At this site, they provide a very extensive history of art timeline. So as I scroll down a little bit here, you can find more narrative going on here and providing good background and filling in the gaps, so to speak, of what was going on in history at that time and in different cultures. And what's helpful here is, and what's more enriching, is not just are they looking at artwork, but they're also considering architecture and other things that are happening during that same period of time. So while you're not seeing a lot of graphics right here, if you click into any of the particulars, and also notice the timeline is very specific here, and they're breaking it down into smaller and smaller portions. If you click into any of these, you can then find a whole lot more information along with representative works of those particular periods. This is another good website to provide a lot of good information. Look how extensive all of this information is. This can provide you with a lot more background and context as you look to present different periods of art and different representative works to your students. To review, in this video, we considered the stages of development in art of early childhood students. We looked at the scribble stage, the pre-schematic, and the schematic stages. Then we looked at how does art contribute to a child's development in the areas of artistic, creative, emotional, social, cognitive, and physical domains. And we raised a very important point that art is considered to be a child's first written language. Then we focused on developmentally appropriate practices in art, and we indicated that it's an important goal under age 3 to allow children to explore both media and art tools. And we pointed out that children are ready to experience art pretty early as age 1, a lot earlier than a teacher might think for some of the media. And then we finished by taking a look at an introduction to several of the major periods of art. To conclude, at our next in-person class, we're going to start by reviewing and discussing the content from this video, and then let's spend our time doing hands-on art activities. In particular, let's create a work of abstract art and show how you could expose this to your students and help them explore it. And then let's have the opportunity to create a post-impressionist painting inspired by the works of Vincent van Gogh. Have a great week and look forward to seeing you at our next in-person class.